The year is 1918. The Great War is coming to a close. Influenza rampages across the globe, and despite it all, or perhaps because of it, the worldwide art scene flourishes. World War I and Interbellum would see to the birth of Dada, Surrealism, and radical changes in both film and filmmaker. One such pioneer, looking to pave film forward, would find himself wandering the streets of Berlin, searching for an inspiration. But, soon enough, he happens upon a bookshop. He enters, and inside he finds the exact thing he was searching for all this time: the Malleus Maleficarum. The man in question was Benjamin Christensen, a Danish director preparing for his third feature film. Pre-production details are slim to nil, but we do know that while staying in Berlin, he chanced upon a book that would help inform his next film, Häxan. Decades later, it would be considered one of the most important films born from the Scandic silent era. The Malleus Maleficarum, or in English, The Hammer of Witches, was an important piece of literature for Christensen. Published in 1486, it was a supposed guide to demonic possession and prosecution. The latter recommended torture and death to end the quote-unquote evils of witchcraft. Accounts differ, but some presume the book failed to take hold, at least at first. Portions of the Inquisition rejected the treatise, and certain academic groups condemned its unethical suggestions and theological contradictions. Nevertheless, the following century saw a swift rise to the prosecution of witchcraft and the execution of those thought to practice it. The influence of the Malleus Maleficarum is up for debate, but, if you'll allow it, one might go so far as to consider it the origin point of that prosecution, a sort of Nexus of Evil. Of course, that's a bit of a stretch, historical or otherwise, but perhaps that's how Christensen viewed it too. After all, the book was filled with recommendations to deceive, discriminate, torture, and execute, through line with overt sexism. It's that latter point that Christensen honed in on, drawing parallel between the prosecution of medieval witches and the diagnosis and treatment of so-called 1900s hysterics. Häxan sits at an interesting point in its medium's history, trailblazing genre conventions and techniques in filmmaking. To that latter point, the film is brimming with creative flair, including elaborate makeup, stop-motion dioramas, and exposure stacking. Perhaps the best example of this is the Flying Witch vignette, a scene that required hundreds of miniatures and model houses, a carousel, an airplane engine, and 75 extras, all for a sequence less than 1 minute long. Häxan exists in an odd, ambiguous space. It's a film that predates, anticipates, and informs the horror and documentary genres, but isn't often ranked among them. But perhaps it's understandable, at least when it comes to the latter. Christensen initially frames Häxan as an anthropological dissection of the past, beginning his film with an objective declaration and still image slideshow. But As we progress, the intertitles, much like the film itself, become more personal and persuasive, acting as the voice of Christensen rather than an objective observer. One such title card includes easily disproven statistics, maybe just to provoke a reaction. Regardless, the discussion of creative liberties is an interesting one, given that the film precedes the genre and its expectations. To that end, I think Häxan makes an intentional choice to blur those lines, to not completely inhabit one genre or the other, but rather overlap them both. Christensen, when asked to describe the nature of his film, would respond with the following quote: "My film has no continuous story, no plot. It could perhaps best be classified as a cultural history lecture in moving pictures. The goal has not only been to describe the witch trials simply as external events, but through cultural history, to throw light on the psychological causes of these witch trials by demonstrating their connection with certain abnormalities of the human psyche, abnormalities which have existed throughout history and still exist in our midst." Christensen would later reiterate this idea in his introduction to the 1941 re-release of Häxan.
Mine damer og herrer, gensynet med en 20 år gammel stumfilm, som vi nu skal se, kan måske alene af den grund blive af interesse, at det giver os lejlighed til at sammenligne stumfilmens udtryksmidler og udtryksmuligheder med den moderne talefilms. De store hekseforfølgelser, som vi her skal se skildret, er en af de største katastrofer i menneskehedens historie. Og hvis vi vil forsøge at blive klar over, hvad der lå bag dem, så må vi ikke glemme, at de opstod i en tidsperiode, der var en uoplyst mørketid, både i åndelig og bogstavelig forstand.
Not unlike its approach to genre, Häxan, whether intentional or not, blurs its own thesis. In the aforementioned re-release, Christensen positions himself as a learned man, introducing us to, and cautioning us against, the barbarisms and regressivism of the medieval age. In doing so, the implication is that the then contemporary understanding of medicine and psychology, an understanding that advocated for the diagnosis and treatment of hysteria, is the answer to, and natural conclusion from, the question of the witch. This is, of course, rooted in the same misogyny as the witch trials themselves, a pop psychological explanation for behavior that robs women of their agency just the same, as if the elevation from witch to patient is some male moral progress to be celebrated. A conclusion like this, perhaps somewhat understandable for its time, is nonetheless disappointing. But I don't think this is the only conclusion one can draw. Earlier, I mentioned that Christensen parallelizes the prosecution of witchcraft with the diagnosis of hysteria, and I think there's a textual reading of the film that suggests just that. Häxan's final chapter juxtaposes scenes of witches with those of hysterics. A prime example, and a visceral one at that, is the scene of 3 witches burning at the stake. Not only does the edit suggest a point of comparison, reframing the title card from serious to sarcastic, but this is also the final piece of footage we're left with. If Christensen's point was to show how far we've come, then why end on such a horrific and cynical note? Regardless, it's filmic choices like these that make untangling Häxan's thesis such a difficult task. Are the title cards tongue-in-cheek or matter-of-fact? Does the interlaced footage suggest comparison or contrast? In both cases, I think it's the former. I think that Christensen is conflating the medieval witch trials and the diagnosis of hysteria, aligning both the monks and physicians under the role of inquisitor, and arguing that the prescription of hysteria is not an answer to the witch trials, but rather a modern recreation. But, even still, it's a difficult read, and perhaps that's to Häxan's benefit. Perhaps that ambiguity, that friction, is what keeps it memorable. After all, here we are over a century later, still discussing it. Before we leave, there's one final thing I'd like to revisit. When it comes to Häxan's thesis, Christensen's decision to cast himself as the devil muddies the waters even further. It's a significant transition from narrator to character, a decision that's simultaneously playful and revealing. And as that character, Christensen chooses to break the fourth wall, talking to us directly. So, in casting himself as the devil, and forcing out this confession, much like the clerics and monks in his own film, Christensen has now positioned himself in the role of Inquisitor, a role that's been the subject of critique for his entire film. So, more than just a tongue-in-cheek role, it's a form of self-critique, a critique of his role in the movie, and a critique of other silent film directors. Perhaps now we might look at these things in a new light. Despite questions over its intent, Häxan was, and still is, one of the most important silent films ever made. It not just established, but popularized trends in both genre and technique. It might have reached the wrong conclusion, but it still has a lot of pathos. It sympathizes rather than demonizes, and illuminates a greater understanding of both witch and witch trial. A dualism between young and old, an intersection of gender and class. The witch trials were a tragedy, and Häxan understands that. Thank you for watching.